solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Wait, hold up. I don't think you know about It's Saucy. It's flavorful, extraordinary, and mind-blowing. Hey, tune into It's Saucy, where I give you nothing but the greatest music out from back then till now, along with hip-hop news and trending topics. It's DJ Steph. Just know that.
It's Saucy.
Listen to the Saucy Hour Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock here on the Voice of Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC.
Hey everybody, Rachel Ray here. Nothing brings a bigger smile to my face than cooking up a big meal for the whole family and lots of friends. But there's not enough room at my table for the 17 million kids in our country who struggle with hunger. That's why the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks collects surplus food to give hope to hungry kids. But they can't do it without your help. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
A message from Feeding America and the Ad Council.
You are listening to Beyond the Game on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I am Jacob Valk. Sitting across from me, Brandon Johnson, Dominic Arbolino, and Eric Fischetti. And we are fortunate enough to be joined by Todd Masters, the author of Trammell, Detroit's Iconic Shortstop. Todd, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate your time. So, what exactly is your book about?
Well, it's a biography on the life and career of Alan Trammell, who's a very iconic figure in Detroit Tigers history as well as American League history. He played 20 years for the Detroit Tigers, which is a very tradition-laden organization. I mean, they've been around 117 years. He's one of 3 players that have played 20 years for that franchise in over a century.
Okay. Well, can you tell us about Detroit's 1984 season?
Well, that was a magical season. I think last year really, was another example that brought it to light. As great as the Cubs were in the first half of the season, Detroit started 35-5. The Cubs didn't come anywhere near that kind of a start. You think about that. A team in the first 40 games of the season, they get to 30 games over 500. Trammell was a huge part of that season, and certainly a season that anybody that lived in the state of Michigan back then will never forget.
All right. So why didn't Trammell win the 1987 AL MVP?
That's a good question. It was one of those years where there was 2 clear front runners. George Bell of Toronto led the league in home runs and RBIs, and I believe he might have led in runs scored as well, which is a tremendous combination of statistical accomplishments. The difference in where I think a lot of people to this day feel that Trammell got slighted is, one, he played the much more difficult and much more important position, shortstop. And, he was the centerpiece. He batted cleanup on that 87 team, which was, at the time, the highest-scoring offensive team in baseball since the 1950s. Hard to believe. 87 was kind of a rabbit ball type year, kind of similar to this year. There was a lot of questions about why so many runs were being scored and so many home runs. Well, the Tigers scored almost 1,000 runs that year, and Trammell, in a very unusual move, the Tigers manager Sparky Anderson made him the cleanup hitter that season. He'd always traditionally been a number 2 hitter, kind of a hit behind the runner type guy, on base guy, score runs, that type of thing. Well, they lost their catcher to free agency, Lance Parrish, who had been their cleanup hitter previously, and Sparky Anderson made Trammell the cleanup hitter, and it was another kind of magical year. But anyway, back to your question. It was a very close vote. Trammell lost out to George Bell, and I think really to this day, I think it's hurt Trammell. I think it's hurt his Hall of Fame qualifications to some extent. I think it was just that, it was just one of those things that you need on your resume to maybe get you over the hump.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you lay out Trammell's baseball career for us after he retired from playing the game?
Yeah, he was a coach in the National League shortly after he stopped stopped playing. But then in 2003, just 7 years after he stopped playing, he was brought back as kind of a savior figure for a Tigers franchise that was very down and out. They had no talent. They hadn't been good in a long time. They had changed ownership. They had just recently brought in a whole new front office, and Trammell was brought in as the manager. And, of course, he was a very popular pick for that position, but unfortunately for him, the franchise was nowhere ready to win, and they had a very disastrous 2003 season where they lost 119 games, almost came within one game of tying the worst or the most losses in baseball history. They rebounded a little bit the next couple of years, but not enough, and Trammell really looked like he wasn't ready to be a manager at that point. Since then, he's kind of bounced around. He's been in different organizations. The Cubs, the Diamondbacks, is a bench coach. He's now in the back in the Tigers organization. In their front office, he does a lot of on-field work, on scouting, that type of thing. Kind of more specialized when they're getting ready to make a big decision. He's involved quite heavily. So, to some extent, he's become almost like a godfather figure in the organization. That elder statesman that very iconic, reminds people of the good days, and still has a very valued place in that organization.
Talking to Todd Masters, the author of Trammell, Detroit's Iconic Shortstop. And staying with that train of thought, how responsible do you think Trammell was for the horrible play of the Tigers teams that he managed?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I delve into that a little bit in the book. It's hard to say. A year after he was fired, the team went to the World Series under Jim Leland, which most people on the surface would suggest that the managing must have been horrible, and you bring in a competent manager and he takes them to the World Series in his first season. But if you take a closer inspection, a lot of players that helped Jim Leland go to the World Series weren't around when Trammell was managing, or they weren't the same players. They either were injured. Guys like Maglio Ordonez played with a sports hernia under Trammell's last year. But the biggest difference was probably in the pitching. Justin Verlander was a rookie in the season under Leland. They had a reliever named Joel Zamaya, who was just a lights-out type guy, rookie. And they also had Kenny Rogers, a veteran who had a tremendous season. So Leland definitely got the benefit of some additional players and some players like Curtis Granderson, who really kind of came into their own under Leland, where they hadn't under Trammell.
Right, true, yeah. Would you be able to describe to us the legacy that Trammell and Lou Whitaker left on baseball?
Well, they're by far the longest the double play tandem that played the most years together, the most games together. They set the American League record for the teammates that had played in the most games together. And they were great players. They batted 1-2 for the Tigers for a long time. They came to the majors at the same time. They were strategically placed together in winter ball in the winter of 1976 to be a shortstop double play combination. A year later, they were in the majors and played 19 years for Whitaker, 20 years for Trammell. Most of that time is very iconic, given players in the middle of the Detroit infield. And, most of that time, that was a very successful franchise. The Tigers, were arguably the most successful team of the 1980s. They only won the one World Series, but they, were consistently, they had 11 winning seasons in a row. They had the best record in baseball twice in the 80s. And, like I said, those guys were huge, huge pieces of that.
Mm-hmm. All right, so do you think that Trammell should be in the Hall of Fame?
I've been kind of a fence rider on that question, to be honest.
You want to change that? You want to make a bold pick?
There's arguments certainly both ways, and I certainly understand why he's not in right now. I do think he's got a very good chance of getting put in the Hall of Fame later this coming winter when the Veterans Committee he's eligible to be looked at this year. There's three things that hurt Trammell's candidacy for the Hall of Fame. One, his overall career numbers, the accumulated, the career totals, are probably not what they need to be. Now, that is not a reflection of the type of player he was, but if you look at his career, after age 32, he played 6 more seasons, and they were all very injury-plagued seasons where he wasn't the player that he wanted to be or the Tigers needed him to be. And by the end of, by his last couple of years, he just wasn't capable of being that player anymore, all due to injuries. The second thing I think that really hurts him is, the exposure. The prime of his career was the 1980s. That was before ESPN was showing games every night or your Major League Network was in existence. I mean, the people that saw Trammell were the people who either went to the games or, saw him on local TV. He was the MVP of the 1984 World Series, which unfortunately only went 5 games. And they, to be honest, they didn't play, that aura-laden team. They played the San Diego Padres, and they took care of them in pretty quick fashion. So, that's not really remembered as a titanic battle. And then 87, when they had the best record in baseball, and he arguably could have been the MVP in the American League, the Tigers were surprisingly upset by the Minnesota Twins, and he didn't get a chance to play in that second World Series. So, I think between not winning the MVP, maybe not getting into a second World Series, I think those exposure things really hurt him. And then the third thing that I think is also, kept him out is at the time he was playing, he was doing things that were, almost unheard of, or he really was kind of a trendsetter of, with Robin Yount and Cal Ripken, of, one of those shortstops who played an all-around game. He wasn't the, all-field, no-hit shortstop that, was very common when he came into the majors. But what happened is right in the last 2 years before he retired, you had guys like A-Rod, Jeter, Nomar Garciaparra, Miguel Tejada, guys that were just a totally different caliber of athlete, bigger, stronger, faster, were putting up incredible statistics in the late 1990s, early 2000s. That was a steroid era, and we certainly know the suspicions and accusations around A-Rod and, maybe to a lesser degree around Miguel Tejada. And, I think guys like Trammell, that played right before that era kind of got lost in all the numbers that were generated over the next decade or so. And, and really kind of continue into today. I mean, the modern shortstops are all-around players. A lot of, on many teams, they're the best all-around player on the team.
Okay. And can you take us through a typical day for you when you were writing this book?
A typical day?
Like from start to finish?
Yeah. Most of my writing I did, I'm not a full-time writer. I work for a healthcare system. It's just kind of a hobby and a little bit of a passion. I marry up, 2 of my passions, which is, baseball history especially, and I enjoy writing. I do a lot of my writing on weekends. A lot of Saturday mornings I'd be at the library writing. Typically I'd do research and then write. Sometimes during the week I would do interviews by phone, that type of thing. So
like this.
There really was no single pattern. It took me 3 years to write this book.
Talking to Todd Masters, the author of Trammell, Detroit's iconic shortstop. And Todd, I'll get you out on this. Why haven't the Tigers retired Trammell's number yet?
Well, that's a good question, and in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan, that question gets asked a lot. It's just kind of ironic that the current shortstop,
Iglesias, right?
Iglesias, he wears number 1, which was Whitaker's number.